The bustling terminal at LAX was alive with energy. Travelers hurried to their gates, dragging carry-ons behind them, while announcements crackled over the speakers. The aroma of coffee and fast food hung in the air, mixing with the faint hum of airplane engines. Amid the chaos, Justin Bieber sat quietly in a corner, dressed casually in a black hoodie and jeans, his signature baseball cap pulled low over his face. For once, he relished the rare anonymity the crowded airport offered. Justin was waiting for his delayed flight to Atlanta, where he was scheduled to perform at a charity concert. It wasn't often that he could sit alone without fans rushing up for photos or autographs. This moment, though mundane, felt refreshing. He sipped on his latte and scrolled through his phone, catching up on messages and headlines, his earbuds drowning out the surrounding noise. But even as he tried to blend into the background, Justin's sharp eyes caught something unusual. Sitting a few rows away was an elderly black woman, quietly knitting a bright yellow scarf. Her calm demeanor stood out against the frantic energy of the terminal. She seemed unbothered by the crowd, entirely focused on her work. Justin couldn't help but smile at the contrast. She presented a pocket of peace in a sea of chaos. Moments later, however, his attention was drawn to a different scene. A group of sharply dressed business travelers, seated nearby, began whispering and chuckling among themselves, their eyes darting toward the woman. At first, Justin didn't think much of it, but as the minutes passed, their mocking gestures and audible remarks about her race became impossible to ignore. Justin's smile faded. His heart tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. In a world where progress was preached, here was an open display of prejudice, right in front of him. He pulled out his earbuds, his latte now forgotten on the seat beside him. As the tension in the air grew, Justin felt a familiar fire ignite within him, the same fire that drove his music, his passion, and his sense of justice. He knew he couldn't just sit back and watch. Justin sat there, weighing his options. He wasn't the type to seek confrontation, especially in public, but something about the situation gnawed at him. The elderly woman remained focused on her knitting, seemingly oblivious to the mockery directed her way. Or perhaps, Justin thought, she was just used to ignoring such behavior, a realization that only deepened his resolve. The group's laughter grew louder, and one of the men leaned over, pretending to mimic her knitting movements. His exaggerated gestures drew more chuckles from his companions. Justin's hands tightened into fists. This wasn't just rude, it was outright degrading. He stood up, adjusting his hoodie, and approached the group. His movements were calm but deliberate, each step carrying a silent message: enough is enough. "Hey," Justin said firmly, his voice cutting through the chatter. The group turned to him, their smug expressions faltering for a moment, as they registered who was standing in front of them. "Is there a problem here?" Justin continued, his tone steady but laced with authority. One of the men, a middle-aged executive with a slicked-back hairstyle, smirked and leaned back in his chair. "Relax, man. We're just having a little fun." "Fun?" Justin repeated, his gaze unwavering. "Making fun of someone who's done nothing to you? That's your idea of fun?" The smirk faded, replaced by a defensive scowl. "Look, we didn't mean anything by it. Why do you care, anyway?" Justin took a deep breath, his frustration barely contained. "I care because what you're doing isn't just mean, it's ignorant. That woman over there deserves your respect, not your ridicule. And if you think this kind of behavior is acceptable, then you've got a lot to learn about being decent human beings." The other members of the group exchanged uncomfortable glances. They hadn't expected to be called out, especially not by someone like Justin Bieber. The elderly woman finally looked up, her knitting paused in her hands. Her eyes met Justin's, and for a brief moment, he saw a mix of surprise and gratitude in her expression. She didn't say a word, but her gaze spoke volumes. The confrontation had drawn the attention of other passengers nearby. People started whispering, some even pulling out their phones to record. The group of businessmen, realizing they were now the center of unwanted attention, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Look," the executive muttered, "we didn't mean to offend anyone. We'll stop, okay?" Justin nodded but didn't back down. "Good. Next time, think before you act. Words and actions matter." With that, he turned back toward his seat, his heart still pounding. He wasn't sure if the group had truly learned their lesson, but at least the ridicule had stopped. As he sat down, the elderly woman gave him a small, appreciative nod before returning to her knitting. Justin leaned back in his chair, his earbuds still out. For the first time in a long while, he felt a deeper sense of purpose, knowing he'd stood up for something that truly mattered. As the train continued its journey, the mood in the car shifted. Justin's confrontation had left a noticeable impact, not just on the group of men but on everyone nearby. Conversations quieted and a new sense of respect seemed to settle over the passengers. Justin gazed out the window, trying to calm his nerves. Standing up for the elderly woman had been instinctive, but now he wondered how the situation might unfold. Would it make a difference? Or would the moment pass as just another fleeting event in the world's noise? But then, something unexpected happened. A young girl sitting a few rows away approached Justin hesitantly, clutching a sketchpad to her chest. Her curly hair framed a face that was equal parts shy and determined. "Excuse me?" she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the train. Justin turned toward her, offering a gentle smile. "Hey there, what's up?" "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her cheeks flushing red. "My grandma knits too, and sometimes people laugh at her because she can't hear very well. What you did, it was really cool." Justin's heart softened at her words. "Your grandma must be amazing," he said, leaning forward slightly. "And for what it's worth, I think people like her and you are pretty cool too." The girl beamed, and before heading back to her seat, she handed Justin her sketchpad. On the page was a quick pencil sketch of him standing in front of the group, his stance confident, his face stern. "I drew this," she said shyly. "I thought it was brave." Justin looked at the sketch and felt a surge of emotion. He thanked her sincerely, watching as she returned to her seat with a renewed bounce in her step. The moment wasn't lost on the other passengers. One by one, people began to speak up. "That was the right thing to do," said a middle-aged woman across the aisle. "I wish more people had the guts to stand up like that," added a man holding a newspaper. Even the group of businessmen seemed to reflect on their actions. The executive who had spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably, his bravado gone. We didn't think," he stammered, trailing off as no excuse seemed sufficient. The elderly woman, who had remained quiet through it all, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of years of wisdom. "Thank you, young man," she said, her eyes meeting Justin's again. "It takes courage to stand up for others. Not everyone would have done what you did." Justin nodded, humbled by her words. "I just did what felt right," he replied. As the train neared its next stop, Justin noticed other passengers subtly adjusting their behavior. The once loud group of men had grown quieter, their laughter replaced by awkward murmurs. Nearby, a few younger passengers offered their seats to standing elders. It was a small ripple, but a ripple nonetheless, a reminder that one act of kindness, one moment of standing up for what's right, could inspire others to reflect and do the same. Justin leaned back, holding the sketch pad in his hands, and smiled to himself. The world wasn't perfect, but moments like these gave him hope. As the train approached its next stop, the once tense atmosphere had softened into something more thoughtful. Justin sat back in his seat, holding the young girl's sketch pad in his hands. The drawing she had given him, a raw, heartfelt depiction of his act of courage, seemed to embody more than just the moment. It was a reminder that small actions could leave lasting impressions. The elderly woman adjusted her scarf, glancing out of the window as the station came into view. She looked at Justin and smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude that didn't need to be spoken. Justin smiled back, tipping his head slightly in acknowledgement. The train slowed to a halt, and several passengers began gathering their belongings. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and a cool gust of wind swept through the car. Justin watched as the elderly woman stood up, her knitting neatly tucked away in her bag. "Here, let me help you," Justin offered, rising to his feet. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice warm but weary. Justin helped her steady herself as she moved toward the door. The other passengers made way, their earlier indifference replaced by a subtle sense of respect. As the woman stepped off the train, she turned back to look at Justin one last time. "Keep being who you are," she said softly. "The world needs more people like you." Justin felt a lump in his throat as he nodded. He didn't know if he deserved her praise, but her words resonated deeply. As the train pulled away, Justin returned to his seat, staring out the window at the bustling platform fading into the distance. The moment lingered in his mind, intertwining with memories of his upbringing. He thought about his grandmother, who had taught him the importance of standing up for others. She was a fierce woman with a kind heart, always emphasizing that kindness and courage were the strongest weapons against the world's cruelty. "Never let fear keep you silent," she had told him once. "Sometimes, speaking up can change a life, not just theirs, but yours too." Justin smiled faintly at the memory. His grandmother had been right. Today wasn't just about protecting the elderly woman from ridicule, it was about reminding everyone, including himself, of the power of human decency. As the train continued its journey, Justin noticed subtle changes among the passengers. The group of men who had mocked the elderly woman were now quiet, their earlier bravado replaced by reflective silence. The young girl who had given him the sketchpad was showing her drawings to her mother, her smile wide and proud. And Justin. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The world wasn't perfect, far from it, but moments like these reminded him that even in its imperfection, there was hope. Sometimes, all it took was one voice to make a difference. One small act of courage to spark change. And Justin promised himself that he would always strive to be that voice, no matter how daunting the challenge might seem. As the train rolled on, Justin remained in his seat, still reflecting on what had unfolded. The sketchpad lay beside him, its pages filled with the young girl's imaginative strokes, a poignant reminder of the day's events. He glanced around the car, noticing subtle shifts in the passenger's demeanor. The once aloof man sitting near the door now offered his seat to a standing mother holding a toddler. The young woman with headphones who had earlier avoided eye contact helped an older gentleman retrieve his bag from the overhead rack. It was as though Justin's actions had ignited a chain reaction, a quiet wave of kindness rippling through the train. Justin leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He hadn't intended to become a catalyst for change, he had simply done what he felt was right. But seeing the impact, however small, filled him with a sense of purpose. The elderly woman's words echoed in his mind, "The world needs more people like you." He couldn't help but wonder if this was true for everyone, if small acts of courage, compassion, or even simple acknowledgement could ripple outward, changing perspectives and behaviors in ways he might never fully see. At the next stop, a new wave of passengers boarded. Among them was a young man wearing a uniform, his name tag reading Officer Daniels. He moved with a certain confidence, his gaze sharp but kind. He noticed Justin and nodded in acknowledgement, perhaps having overheard parts of the earlier confrontation. "You handled that well?" Daniels said, settling into the seat across from Justin. Justin shrugged, slightly embarrassed. "I just did what anyone should do." The officer smiled knowingly. "You'd be surprised how often people don't." They fell into an easy conversation, touching on topics like community, courage, and the subtle ways society could be nudged toward betterment. Daniels shared stories from his work, moments when stepping in had made all the difference, and others when silence had allowed harm to prevail. "It's not always about grand gestures," Daniel said. "Sometimes it's the little things. A kind word, a helping hand, standing up when it's uncomfortable. That's how we build trust. That's how we rebuild what's broken." Justin nodded, feeling a deep resonance with the officer's words. It wasn't just about that one moment on the train. It was about carrying that sense of responsibility into every interaction, every decision, every day. As the train continued its journey, Justin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the day had reminded him of his grandmother's wisdom and reaffirmed his belief that even in a world often marred by indifference, there was still room for goodness to thrive. When the train finally reached his stop, Justin gathered his things, tucking the sketchpad carefully into his bag. He stepped onto the platform, the cool evening air brushing against his face. As he walked away, he couldn't help but glance back at the train, now filled with strangers who, in their own ways, had been touched by the same moment. The train pulled away, disappearing into the horizon, but its impact lingered. Justin walked on, his steps light and his heart full, ready to carry the lessons of the day into the world beyond. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that day on the train stayed fresh in Justin's mind. It wasn't just the moment he stood up to defend the young girl and her grandmother, it was the ripple effect he witnessed afterward. He began to see opportunities for small acts of courage and kindness everywhere, and he felt a growing responsibility to act. One morning, as Justin sipped his coffee and scrolled through the news on his phone, he stumbled upon an article. It detailed the rising incidence of racial prejudice in public spaces, filled with statistics and disheartening anecdotes. The story of a man who had been harassed on a bus resonated deeply with him. Justin couldn't help but think, what if someone had stood up for him? That was the moment Justin realized his journey couldn't stop with one train ride. He needed to do more. He opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers moving with urgency. In a few hours he had created a blog post titled "A Ripple of Courage: How Small Acts Can Challenge Bigotry." In it, he recounted the events on the train, the courage it took to stand up, and the importance of being an ally in moments of injustice. Justin shared the post on social media, unsure of what kind of response it might receive. Within hours, the comments and messages began to pour in. People shared their own experiences of witnessing or enduring prejudice, thanking Justin for inspiring them to act differently in the future. "Your story reminded me of a time I stayed silent," one commenter wrote. "Next time I won't." As the days passed, Justin's story gained traction, even catching the attention of local media. A journalist reached out for an interview, and soon, Justin found himself sharing his perspective on a larger platform. He emphasized the importance of speaking out, of standing in solidarity with those who are vulnerable, and of choosing courage over comfort. But Justin didn't stop there. The blog post evolved into a broader initiative. With the help of Officer Daniels and a few others he connected with, Justin started a community workshop series titled Ripple of Change. The workshops focused on equipping people with tools to address discrimination, handle difficult conversations, and step into allyship with confidence. One of their first events was held in a local library. Justin stood at the front of a modest crowd, parents, students, retirees, all eager to learn. He began with the story of the train ride, sharing how a single moment had transformed not only his day but his perspective. "This isn't about being a hero," Justin told them. "It's about being human. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small it may seem." As the workshop ended, a young woman approached Justin. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "My little brother was bullied at school last year," she said. "I didn't know how to help him, but your story gave me hope. Now I know what to do next time." Justin smiled, deeply moved. "That's all I could ever hope for, one ripple at a time." The initiative grew steadily, with more people joining the movement and sharing their own stories of courage. Justin didn't see himself as a leader, but his humility and authenticity inspired others to step up. Slowly but surely, the ripple effect he'd witnessed on the train became a wave, touching lives in ways he hadn't imagined. Looking back, Justin realized that the impact of his actions on that fateful day wasn't just about standing up in the moment. It was about how that moment had set him on a path of purpose, courage, and unwavering hope for a kinder, more united world. As the months passed, Justin continued to speak out about racism, prejudice, and injustice. The workshops became more frequent, and his message of standing up for others resonated far beyond what he had imagined. People from different walks of life joined in, young and old, from diverse backgrounds, all united by a common goal: to make the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. However, it wasn't always easy. Not everyone was open to change. Justin faced criticism from some who argued that a celebrity shouldn't be involved in social issues, that it wasn't his place to speak out. There were online trolls who tried to discredit him, calling him naive or out of touch. But each time he faced negativity, he reminded himself of Ruth and the lessons she had taught him on that day at the airport. He thought about the power of kindness, the importance of standing up, and how it was never about popularity, it was about doing what was right. One day, Justin received a message that would shift his perspective once again. It came from Ruth, the elderly woman he had met in the airport that day. She thanked him for everything he was doing, and then she shared something personal, a letter she had written to her grandchildren about her experiences growing up during the civil rights movement. "I want them to understand the struggles we faced," she wrote. "But more importantly, I want them to know that even in the darkest times we found light. And it was kindness, my dear, that always lit the way." The letter moved Justin deeply. He realized that Ruth had already done so much, not only in her own life but in the lives of others. She had been a witness to history, and now she was shaping the future by inspiring him and countless others. In the letter, Ruth also shared her hopes for Justin's work, urging him to continue with the workshops and to never stop using his voice for change. "We need more people like you, Justin," she wrote. "People who aren't afraid to speak the truth, no matter the cost." The letter was a turning point for Justin. It reaffirmed the importance of his mission, and he knew that he couldn't stop now. He decided to take things to the next level. He partnered with local organizations that focused on racial justice and began speaking at schools and universities. His story, once just about an incident on a train, had grown into a movement, one that inspired people not only to speak up but to take action in their own communities. As he spoke at a college in Chicago, a young man approached him afterward. He shared that he had recently witnessed a racial incident at his workplace, and for the first time, he felt empowered to speak up and report it. "Your story helped me find my voice," he said, shaking Justin's hand. "Your voice matters," Justin replied, his eyes filled with gratitude. Justin had become more than a pop star, he had become a catalyst for change. He realized that his platform, his fame, was not just for entertainment, but for something far greater, to inspire a movement of kindness, courage, and solidarity. One evening, as Justin was walking through the streets of Los Angeles, he received a call from Ruth. "Justin," she said, her voice warm and full of pride, "I've been watching everything you've done, and I couldn't be prouder. You've taken this movement to places I could never have imagined. But I think we both know this isn't the end. It's only the beginning." Justin smiled, looking out at the bustling city around him. He had come so far from the day he stood up on that train, but he knew his journey was far from over. There was still work to do. There were still voices to be heard. And together, with Ruth and everyone else who had joined the movement, Justin was determined to keep pushing for a better, more inclusive world. "We've only just begun," he said softly, a promise to himself and to the world. The ripple of change that started with a single act of courage was now a wave, and Justin knew it would continue to grow, touching lives and transforming hearts, one story at a time. The momentum of Justin's movement continued to grow, and soon his name became synonymous with change and progress. What started as a response to a single racist incident had blossomed into a widespread initiative. People from all over the country reached out to him, sharing their own experiences and asking how they could contribute to the cause. Justin had always believed in the power of stories to unite and inspire, and now he saw that in action. Every conversation, every workshop, and every event he organized helped amplify the voices of those who had long been silenced. People of different races, backgrounds, and cultures came together to share their personal experiences and offer solutions. The workshops were no longer just about learning, it was about listening, understanding, and taking collective action. One particularly memorable event took place in New York City. Justin was invited to speak at a massive rally against systemic racism, organized by a coalition of activist groups. The streets were packed with thousands of people, all holding signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and "Equality for All." It was a sea of voices united for a common cause. As Justin took the stage, he felt a surge of emotion. It was no longer just about him or his journey, it was about something much bigger, something that transcended his own experience. It was about justice. The crowd went silent as Justin spoke, his words carrying the weight of everything he had learned over the past year. He talked about his own mistakes, his growth, and the lessons he had learned from Ruth. But most importantly, he spoke about the need for continued action. "We've made progress, but we can't stop here," he said. "This is just the beginning. We need to continue to fight, to push, and to stand up for each other every single day." The response was overwhelming. The crowd erupted in applause, and many attendees came forward afterward to share their gratitude. Some had never felt so heard or seen. For many, it was the first time they felt empowered to take a stand. "Thank you for using your voice," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "I've been silent for too long, but now I know I can speak up too." The ripple effect of that moment continued long after the rally ended. People who had attended shared their experiences on social media, encouraging others to join the movement. Stories of small victories, from people confronting racist behaviors in their communities to businesses adopting more inclusive practices, flooded in. Each person had found their own way to contribute, whether big or small, and the collective impact was undeniable. As Justin's platform grew, so did his responsibility. He began working closely with other influencers, artists, and activists, creating a network of individuals all committed to racial equality. The movement transcended celebrity culture, with ordinary people becoming leaders in their own right. They understood that this was not about a single individual's fame, it was about a shared mission. One evening, as Justin sat in his office, reflecting on the progress they had made, he received another call from Ruth. Her voice, as always, carried wisdom and warmth. "You've done more than I ever imagined, Justin," she said, her tone filled with pride. "But I want you to remember one thing. The most important part of this work isn't the rallies or the speeches, it's the everyday actions. It's the small kindnesses, the conversations, and the willingness to listen. That's where true change happens." Justin smiled, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was right. As much as he had enjoyed the rallies and the big moments, it was the quiet, personal acts of courage that mattered most. It was in the conversations he had with friends, family, and strangers that the real transformation took place. The next day, he was invited to speak at a local high school in a small town. The students had organized a forum on diversity and inclusion, and they were eager to hear from Justin. When he arrived, he was struck by the genuine interest and passion in their eyes. These young people were determined to make a difference in their community, and Justin knew that their generation would carry the torch forward. As he spoke to the students, Justin shared Ruth's story, explaining how one simple act of kindness had sparked a movement. He encouraged them to start small, talk to their classmates, challenge the status quo, and never be afraid to stand up for what was right. "You may not change the world overnight," Justin said, "but you can change someone's world. And that's where it starts." The students embraced the message, and many began working on their own projects to promote racial equality. Justin knew that the journey was far from over, but he felt a sense of fulfillment knowing that the work was continuing in the hands of the next generation. Ruth's words echoed in his mind. "The most important part of this work isn't the rallies or the speeches, it's the everyday actions." He realized that the ripple effect had only just begun, and as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, change would continue to spread. Justin's mission was clear: keep pushing forward, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference in the lives of those who needed it the most. And in doing so, he would honor Ruth's legacy and continue the fight for a world of true equality, one story at a time. Despite the growing momentum, Justin knew the fight was far from over. For all the visible victories, rallies, social media campaigns, and public speeches, there were still countless quiet, everyday struggles faced by people of color. These were the stories that weren't making the headlines, the battles that weren't being fought on national stages. But they were just as important, if not more so. One afternoon, Justin sat with a group of young activists in a local community center, listening as they shared their personal experiences with racism. Their stories were raw, their voices trembling with emotion. A young man spoke about how he was followed around a store, accused of shoplifting simply because of his appearance. Another woman recalled being passed over for a promotion at work, despite being more qualified than her peers, only to later hear from a colleague that her race had been a factor in the decision. Each story was a reminder of the subtle, insidious nature of racism that still permeated society, sometimes invisible, often unacknowledged, but ever present. These were the battles that didn't make it to the front pages, yet they were the ones that shaped the daily lives of millions. Justin had always known about these struggles, but hearing them firsthand from those who lived them was a stark reminder of how much more needed to be done. The energy and passion in the room were undeniable, but there was also a sense of fatigue. These young activists were tired. They were tired of fighting the same battles over and over again, tired of explaining themselves, tired of the emotional toll it took to be constantly on the front lines. One of them, a young woman named Maya, voiced what many of them were feeling. "It feels like we're pushing against a wall that never moves. Every time we think we've made progress, we hit another setback. It's exhausting." Justin listened intently. He understood. The weight of the struggle could be overwhelming, and it was easy to feel disheartened when change seemed so slow. But he also knew that the change they were working for wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. "Look, I get it," Justin said, his voice steady. "It's hard. Some days it feels like we're not making a difference at all. But you're wrong if you think that's true. Every conversation, every story shared, every moment you speak up, it all matters. You're not pushing against an immovable wall. You're creating cracks in it. And eventually, those cracks will break it apart." His words were met with silence at first, but slowly, Maya and the others began to nod. Justin wasn't offering a quick fix or an easy answer. He wasn't pretending that the struggle would end overnight, but he was reminding them that every small action had power, and that the road to lasting change was paved by people like them, people who refused to stop fighting, even when the going got tough. In the weeks that followed, Justin made it a point to focus on these quieter struggles. He knew that while it was important to continue with the larger initiatives, it was just as crucial to highlight and address the everyday racism that many people faced. He began organizing smaller community gatherings, where individuals could share their experiences in a safe space. These gatherings weren't about grand speeches or media attention, they were about listening, connecting, and offering support. One such gathering took place at a local coffee shop, where Justin and a group of activists sat down with community members. As people shared their stories, Justin noticed a shift. There was a sense of solidarity in the room, a recognition that they weren't alone in their struggles. In that moment, he realized that sometimes the most important thing wasn't pushing for change on a large scale, it was simply making people feel seen and heard. Sometimes, one woman said, her voice trembling, I just need someone to listen, to understand that what I'm going through isn't just in my head, that it's real. Justin nodded. I hear you. And you're not alone. We're all in this together. These moments, though small, were some of the most powerful of his journey. They were a reminder that the fight for racial equality wasn't just about large protests and political change, it was about creating spaces where individuals could share their pain, their hopes, and their dreams. The stories that came out of these gatherings stayed with Justin long after the events had ended. He realized that each person's experience was a piece of the larger puzzle. It was easy to get caught up in the headlines and the big movements, but the true work of change was often done in the quiet moments, in the conversations that happened behind the scenes. As Justin continued to speak at rallies, workshops, and community events, he made a concerted effort to amplify these unseen struggles. He encouraged people to share their personal stories, not just in public forums, but also in their daily lives. Change, he knew, began with individuals, and it was only through connecting, understanding, and supporting each other that real progress could be made. In one particular moving moment, he was invited to speak at a memorial for a local activist who had passed away. This woman, named Clara, had spent her entire life fighting for justice and equality in her community. Despite her tireless work, she had never been recognized on a national scale. Yet, at the memorial, the outpouring of love and gratitude was palpable. People from all walks of life came to honor her legacy, sharing how Clara had personally impacted their lives, whether through a simple conversation or her unwavering commitment to the cause. Clara's life was a testament to the power of the everyday struggle. She had never sought fame or recognition, yet her impact had been immeasurable. Justin realized that this was the true nature of activism, the quiet, often unseen work that laid the foundation for the larger movements. He left the memorial with a renewed sense of purpose. The struggle for racial equality was not just about the big moments, it was about the unseen battles, the small acts of kindness and courage that, over time, built a movement strong enough to change the world. The road ahead was still long, but Justin knew one thing for sure: change was happening, in both big and small ways. And every single person who contributed to that change, no matter how small their action, was part of something much greater than themselves.